In my last video on invalid marriages in Catholic teaching, we talked about one aspect that can invalidate a marriage attempt, but there are actually many more. So today I want to go over those other reasons. We'll also clear up some common misunderstandings about what doesn't make a marriage invalid, because a lot of people seem confused about that also. The Catholic Church teaches that marriage is a sacred covenant before God, not just a legal contract. But for a marriage to be valid, certain conditions must exist from the very beginning when the vows are made. If they're missing, the marriage can be invalid in the eyes of God. First, if there's lack of true consent. If one or both people were pressured into marrying by family, a pregnancy, threats, or force, it's invalid. Marriage requires free will. You must choose your spouse without fear or coercion. Second, rejecting permanence, faithfulness, or openness to life. Openness to children is required from the moment the vows are exchanged. It's part of the very definition of marriage. For example, if a couple enters marriage while using birth control because they're not sure about having children, that can reveal a lack of true openness. Being Catholic means welcoming children from God as part of marriage. You are allowed to delay children for serious reasons, using moral means. But you cannot begin marriage by closing the door on life through contraception. If the intention is to block children, even temporarily, because you're undecided, that can make the consent invalid. Third, psychological incapacity. Some people are so emotionally unstable, immature, or impaired that they can't understand or live out the duties of marriage. This would be especially true if you walk into your marriage drunk, for example. Fourth, lack of sufficient knowledge. If a person doesn't even understand that marriage is a permanent union between one man and one woman for the good of the spouses and the procreation and education of children, they can't truly consent. Fifth, error about the person or a key quality. If you thought you were marrying one person but actually married someone else, or were deceived about a major quality, like faith, criminal history, or serious moral flaw, consent can be invalid. Sixth, deceit about a serious matter. If one spouse hides something grave, like infertility, illness, addiction, or a criminal past, and the other wouldn't have married if they'd known, the consent is invalid. Seventh, an existing marital bond. If someone is still bound to a valid prior marriage, even if civilly divorced, they are not free to marry again. This requires the person to approach the Catholic Church about an annulment, so that they can investigate and find out whether or not the first marriage was ever valid. The first marriage must be presumed to be valid until otherwise told by the Catholic Church. This is one reason it's best to avoid even dating someone who's divorced. It unnecessarily complicates people's lives and causes damage if the person cannot marry and they should need to break up, or the people may endanger their souls by getting invalidly married anyway. Jesus is clear that divorce and remarriage is adultery, but if there was no valid prior marriage, then that person would be free to marry. Eighth, marrying an unbaptized person without the Church's permission. A Catholic needs to get a dispensation to do this. Without it, the marriage is invalid. Ninth, close relationship. Marriage is prohibited between certain close blood relatives, like parents, siblings, half-siblings, and usually first cousins. It's also prohibited with certain relatives by marriage, called affinity, like a stepchild, stepparent, or mother-in-law. Marriage between adoptive parents and children is also forbidden, as is marriage between godparents and godchildren in the traditional understanding, because of the spiritual bond created at baptism. And finally, perpetual antecedent impotence. This is when a person is permanently unable to engage in the marital act, even before the wedding, and the condition is permanent. This is different from sterility. The inability to have children does not make a marriage invalid. But if a couple cannot consummate the marriage physically at all, the Church teaches that the sacramental bond cannot be formed. Now here's what doesn't make a marriage invalid: arguments, financial problems, loss of attraction, in-law conflicts, or even serious sins after the wedding. If there was free consent, proper understanding, and no true impediment from the start, the Church presumes it's valid. I'd like to make a special note on abuse. Abuse is a grave evil and can be cause for immediate separation to protect the victim. Abuse itself, however, does not automatically make a marriage invalid, but it can be evidence of an invalidity from the start. For example, if there was coercion, psychological incapacity, or deceit about violent tendencies before the wedding. In all cases, safety comes first, and the Church can later investigate validity through the annulment process. If you have reason to believe that your marriage might be invalid, speak to a faithful priest who understands canon law.